urgent question, Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Transport to make an urgent statement to the House on the potential taxpayer liabilities the Government has entered into in its Statement of Principles agreement with Heathrow Airport Limited.
Minister Jessie Norman.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And let me thank the right honourable member, my friend, the member for Putney, for raising this issue. She has been absolutely indefatigable on it, and I salute her. As the Secretary of State set out in his oral statement on Tuesday, we recognise the very strong feelings on this matter from some members and from their constituents across the House. I'm aware of the various representations that have been made in the Chamber that government will be liable for Heathrow's costs should it decide to withdraw support from the scheme. These representations appear to stem from a clause in a non-legally binding agreement between Heathrow and the Department of Transport that has, I'm afraid, been taken out of context. The question was addressed by the Secretary of State for Transport on Tuesday and by the Prime Minister yesterday, so let me repeat, if I may, in the clearest possible fashion, there is no liability here. The Government has not entered into any agreement that gives Heathrow the right to recover its losses in the event of the scheme not proceeding, and nor would it accept any liability for any of the costs that Heathrow Airports Limited has incurred or will incur in the future. For the avoidance of doubt, perhaps I may quote directly from the document in question. It says, "The Statement of Principles does not give either Heathrow Airports Limited or the Secretary of State any right to a claim for damages, losses, liabilities, costs and or expenses or other relief howsoever arising if for whatever reason HAL's scheme does not proceed." And we are absolutely clear that we would have a responsibility to Parliament when a liability, or indeed a contingent liability, were incurred. Yesterday, the Government laid before Parliament a written ministerial statement and a departmental minute that set out a contingent liability, what was a contingent liability, for statutory blight, which will start if the proposed airport's NPS is designated. The liability is contingent because the Government has rightly protected the taxpayer by entering into a binding agreement with Heathrow Airport Limited, whereby the airport assumes the financial liability for successful blight claims if the scheme proceeds. With regard to the wider scheme costs, the answer is simple. We have not notified Parliament for any liability because there is none.
Justine Greening.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the Minister, for who I have a lot of respect for coming to the House today. He mentioned one part of the Statement of Principles, but he will also know that the immediate clause after that says as follows, notwithstanding 2.1.5. In other words, the paragraph he just read out. In other words, it says, in spite of that, Heathrow Airport Limited reserves its right, including but not limited to its right to pursue any and all legal equitable remedies, including cost recovery, available to it. And I set out that yesterday. It's clearly been written by a lawyer. If it doesn't legally matter, why did Heathrow Airport Limited have it in the Statement of Principles? It paves the way for Heathrow recovering costs off the taxpayer when things go wrong. And as the Secretary of State himself said on Tuesday, there are circumstances in which the runway could be built but not then used. So my questions are, why was this term agreed to in the first place? Heathrow is a private company. It should therefore accept the risks. Why was it agreed to exclusively for Heathrow Airport Limited? Was the Secretary of State and the Department of Transport clear-cut with Parliament about the existence of this clause? If it wasn't, why not? Why wasn't it ever flagged up in the National Policy Statement documents that the public have been looked at? What assessment have ministers made of the existing outstanding liability under this clause, given that it has already been triggered, and perhaps he can confirm my assessment of that being correct? Was the Cabinet subcommittee that took a decision to proceed with Heathrow Airport Limited's proposal made aware of this clause in the Statement of Principles? And for transparency, will he publish the information and the papers that the committee did look at, so that we can see what level of detail they had in reaching that conclusion? And is he confident that if we do end up, as I suspect, in a situation where Heathrow expansion goes wrong, this company does pursue the government and taxpayers for potentially billions of pounds of costs, why does he have any faith that they will then honour any public service obligation to routes, to regional airports? And why does he think the Scottish Government should have any confidence that the Memorandum of Understanding will ever be stuck to by Heathrow Airport Limited?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say there's a vast number of questions there, and if there are points that I don't cover, I'm happy to write to the lady and cover any specific issues. She mentioned the Cabinet subcommittee. I'm not a member of such a committee and have not seen the papers presented to it, so I can't comment on that. But let me just be clear, if I may. She asks a question as to whether any liabilities have been created, and she directs my attention to the following clause. Of course, it's a very narrow legal point, but it's very important to focus on it, and I absolutely accept that. The position of the government is that no liabilities have been created, and therefore none need to be disclosed, and no contingent liabilities have been created. This is in the nature of a standard document on which the government took advice both from distinguished leading counsel and from a top-tier law firm of solicitors. And what the document does is simply to allow Heathrow Airports Limited to reserve rights that it would normally have under commercial law, while making clear that the department has no liabilities in respect of the issues already described. So we, as a department, are clear that this agreement is not, this memorandum of understanding is not, or letter is not legally binding. It does not create any legitimate expectation. It does not fetter the discretion of the Secretary of State. It does not give Heathrow the right to claim damages, losses, liabilities, costs, expenses, or any other relief. But of course, Heathrow retains some rights of its own, and that's entirely proper. And there might be some circumstances in the future, with some future government, possibly of a different political persuasion, which did create a liability, a contingent liability. They would then be under an obligation to present that to Parliament in the normal way, and Heathrow Airport might, in the exercise of its legal rights, have the ability to sue them in some respect. But that's not touched on by this question. This is not, in fact, the only document, Mr. Speaker, of its kind. There were two other documents. In October 2016, the government entered into a statement of principles with Heathrow Airport Limited, as we've discussed, but versions of the same document were also agreed with the promoters of the other shortlisted schemes, Gatwick Airport Limited and Heathrow Hub Limited, but those, of course, fell away when the Heathrow Northwest Runway was recommended as the preferred scheme by government. So this is not a one-off deal or any kind of special arrangement with Heathrow itself.